Welcome back to the Behind the Bricks podcast. So one of the things that we haven't talked about, and a very popular way of selling your property, is auctions. So we thought we'd bring in the king of auctions and somebody that we've known ever since Sourced was started, really, Jim Demetriou. Welcome to the podcast, Jim.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me.
So first of all, tell us what your job is and what you do with the auctions.
So I've got quite a varied role. So I'm the national valuer for SDL Auctions.
Yeah.
But I also deal with lots of introducers, lots of estate agents all over the country, and generally people that just want either more information about auctions or are keen to sell at auctions.
And how do you fit into that?
So
what is it? What service do you deliver?
Yeah, so I will discuss and chat with people about the feasibility of auction pricing for them, on a sort of one-to-one basis with people that have got properties to sell. Organisations that have got clients that might be considering auctions, we do talks, we do live events, when we interact with their clients, how they see fit to deliver an option that might be auction. And auctions aren't for everybody, but it's something that's becoming more and more prevalent for a number of reasons.
Oh, we'll get to that point in just a minute. But let's look first of all why people choose auctions over a standard estate agency sale.
I think there's a lot of people out there where life has become different nowadays. Modern world, everybody's impatient. Everybody wants something to happen now. If you put your house on the market and it hasn't sold in a week, what's wrong with it? Why hasn't it sold? The agent's not done something right. They're not marketing it. They're not selling it. So people's patience has got quite thin. And then you couple that with once you have got a sale, there is a high proportion of those sales that are agreed that never materialise. And when that happens,
so high proportion, give us an idea.
Yeah, you're talking somewhere between 35 and 40% of sales that are agreed fall apart. And that's for a number of reasons. It might be that somebody changes their mind. It might be because you've got to remember when somebody buys a house to live in, they've got to sell their existing house to buy the next one. And then you're building a chain. And if you've got several people within that chain and somebody can't get a mortgage, somebody changes their mind, personal financial circumstances change, then that whole sale chain collapses. And if that happens to you 2 or 3 times, you get extremely frustrated. So then you start looking at, is there another option? Is there another way to sell where it's going to become a bit more secure? And that's where people then contact us.
So what a lot of people are looking for is that certainty of sale, because I guess with an auction, it's written into the contract that you've got to complete within a certain amount of time.
Yeah, and there are different types of auctions now, and I think sometimes that's where some people's confusion even sits. So the word that you've got to be looking for is unconditional. So what an unconditional auction is, on the fall of that hammer, the property exchanges contracts. So it's legally binding from the fall of the hammer, because anybody that registers to bid in one of our auctions has to sign our terms of business that gives us authority to exchange on their behalf if they're the winning bidder. There are lots of other types of auctions now that are conditional. So you might still pay auction fees, but you're not exchanging contracts. So for some people, that's not as secure because some of those still do fall through.
So will the other terms and conditions around that be roughly the same? So if it's a conditional,
there's still time scales around those auctions. So most auctions will have wording along the lines of somewhere between 20 and 60 days to complete. So that's the bit that's a bit more certain for people.
And I think for a lot of people, they're going to hear you've got, like, let's say on average you'll have 28 days to complete. That sounds quite intimidating. But then looking at it from the other point of view, looking at it from the seller's point of view, you think, well, if the auction's going to happen at the end of this month, that means by the end of next month, I'll have actually sold the property.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're going through a normal estate agency model, then how long is that taking at the minute? Roughly 5 to 6 months to get to the point of completion. I think that's the average at the moment.
Yeah. But the other thing that's really interesting, auctions are a lot more flexible than people realise.
Okay.
Yeah, and I can see you looking a little bit surprised.
Yeah, go on.
So in an auction, you have what's called an auction legal pack, and that's everything that's relevant about that property for you to peruse, have a look at, get your solicitor to look at if you want to. But there's lots of things that can be flexible. So if I'm selling a property that I believe...
Even in an unconditional auction?
Yeah. So if I'm dealing with a property that I think, it's £2 million, it's in London, only a family that's going to buy it, to live in it, is going to buy it. If I said in that legal pack, you've only got 30 days to complete, people are going to run for the hills and say, my solicitor, my mortgage company is not going to do that in 30 days. I won't bother. So then we're actually hindering a sale, not helping it. So within that auction legal pack, you can set out that you'd like to offer 45 days to complete or 60 days to complete. And the converse happens as well. Buyers can approach the auction house and say, I'm happy to make a bid of this, or if I'm the winning bidder, can I have the flexibility of having longer to complete? And as long as the vendor's happy with that, then yeah, they can have that.
So that's just an agreed between the buyer and the seller. It doesn't, and that can happen
Before an auction.
Before,
not after.
Right.
Because obviously, if it happens after the auction, you've exchanged on the contract that's already there.
Yeah.
If you want some amendments, they've got to be agreed and the contract changed.
Okay.
So there is flexibility, which most people are quite surprised at, but it's still about the certainty of its exchange contracts. That is essentially what an auction's doing for you.
So do you find that the majority of sellers that come to you are people that want that security of sale, and they want that speed of sale? Or do you find that some people just choose an auction because they want to sell their property and they don't want to deal with an estate agent, but they're not motivated to get it done quickly?
We're quite simple folk at auctions, and that's the beauty of what we do. It's quite simple, and a lot of people come to us because they don't want the rigmarole of going through getting 4 estate agents out and it sitting on the market and then it falling through.
Yeah.
So some people just bypass that altogether now because there is another option. And sometimes the hardest thing for some people to get their head round, sometimes we get more than what a property could have achieved with an estate agent. Sometimes we get less, but the key thing is not everybody is after the most amount of money. For some people, their personal, emotional, financial circumstances dictate that they need to sell quickly, and it's not just about how much, and that's what auction can deliver for them.
Or just getting rid of something that is currently a liability for them.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we get lots of landlords now, tenants left, all of a sudden there's enhanced council tax to pay. You've got to pay all the standing charges, there's service charges to pay if it's an apartment. All of a sudden, that empty property that was your buy-to-let might be costing you £500-600 a month. So you need to sell it quickly. You haven't got 6 to 12 months to wait to find a buyer and then to get it sold.
So do you think that that's the perspective? Think about somebody that hasn't ever bought through auctions or has had nothing to do with auctions. Do you think that that's the perspective that they have, that it's just normal stuff happening at auctions? Or do you think that auctions have got like a more negative or more positive
I think there's a lot more people that are quite fearful because it's something they don't understand.
Yeah.
So a lot of what I spend my time doing is actually explaining how auctions work, the pros and cons of auctions, and whether it suits them. Because auctions don't suit everybody. Selling with an estate agent doesn't suit everybody. So it's trying to match people's requirements to a method of selling that suits them for multiple reasons, really.
I think that empathy is something that people struggle with as well, because a lot of people will look at somebody else's position from their viewpoint.
Correct.
So I'm an investor. I've got X amount of money. I want to buy as many houses as I can in the next couple of years, and then to empathise with somebody who's in a position where the tenants have left and the house is a state, and they don't want to spend any money on it, but they want to get rid of it as quickly as possible. It's difficult for them to put themselves in that position and say, they're probably going to go through auction.
I've done property for over 20 years now. I've done auctions for about 8, below market value for about 5 before that. So most of my working property life hasn't just been as an estate agent.
Yeah.
And you kind of have a look at it, and the amount of times, and there's lots of interesting things that I say to people. Would you pay that for your property? No, I wouldn't. But why would somebody else? Never thought of that. Well, the estate agent told me it was worth 200,000, so it's got to be. But you're now on at 175 and you still haven't had a viewing, so maybe it wasn't worth 200,000.
Yeah.
Swap the word marketing price for valuation price, and generally what the estate agency world does makes a little bit more sense. It's only worth what somebody will pay you for it, or what you'll accept for it. So there is 2 sides to every coin.
So do you tend to see similar trends of properties that come through auction that you wouldn't have seen in your estate agency going through an estate agent?
Yeah.
Or do you tend to see trends of the kind of person that is selling their property through auction that you wouldn't have seen through an estate agent?
I get you. It's more about the person and what they're looking for. But interestingly, when you say to somebody auction, their immediate reaction is it's got to be some derelict house that you can't get a mortgage on. Nobody wants to buy it, and it's been sat redundant for 10 years. Yes, we do have them, and we get lots of them. We get lots of properties that tenants have, not left in the condition that they found them in. But similarly, I've sold stately homes in auctions that are phenomenal. I've sold burnt out castles, I've sold nuclear bunkers. There's not a great deal I haven't sold. So the reason I do what I do is because my life is a lot more interesting than when I was an estate agent. Not only because I travel all over the country, but there's properties that you would never ever get with an estate agent that you get to sell.
Give us a couple of examples.
Burnt out castle in Cornwall.
So tell us about that. What was the situation there?
So there was an electrical fire. It had 54 rooms. Obviously, the property wasn't habitable afterwards. We sold the property for about £500,000. But even if it was £1, I said to my son, if that's £1, Tino, we're not buying it. Why not, Dad? It's only £1. Yeah, because it's about £4 million to renovate it. You wouldn't get that with an estate agent. Estate agents are very, very good at selling houses for people to live in. When it's something that doesn't quite fit that, sometimes they struggle. Whereas we've got an ability to sell anything because, you have a look at a catalogue. If there's something that you fancy, you'd buy it. The hardest hurdle for us to overcome is when we have got something that doesn't need any TLC, doesn't need renovating. People might not naturally, especially in the past, look at an auction catalogue to think, let me find my next house to live in.
Yeah.
Whereas that's changing slightly because there are online auctions. Auctions are more prevalent for a number of reasons. So the barriers of people buying from auction from themselves has come down a bit, but the majority of people still buy their next house to live in from an estate agent, and you're not going to change that.
But are you seeing, I guess auctions attract more investors because there's an opportunity. Because that castle, it might sell for £500,000, £4 million to put into it, but then what's it going to be worth at the end of that? And you're not going to get, somebody to buy that to live in.
Somebody did buy that to live in.
Really?
To be honest. Absolutely. Yeah.
Wow. So
and you meet all sorts of people. So the difficulty is, and you will understand it probably better than most, investment purchases and sales are interesting because there's a lot of times where we'll guide something quite low in an auction. We'll get 30, 40, 50 people bidding on it, and it will by far exceed what its perceived current value is.
Yeah.
But then when you add what it's going to cost to renovate it and what the end value is going to be, you might have overpaid for it. But it also depends what you're going to do with it. So in investments now, people turn things into HMOs, they turn things into blocks of flats, they lease properties out to housing associations and councils. So sometimes there's certain walks of life that will rent properties above market value rents. So then that makes that property more valuable to that specific buyer. So it depends what they're going to do with it. And that's where it gets interesting. So most investors aren't just looking at buying a property and doing a straight AST and just renting it to one person for a year. So the world has become a lot more varied when it comes to investments. So that's why I said it earlier, it's worth what it's worth to that person buying it. And you don't know what they're going to do with it, so you don't know what its value is to them.
do you think that purchasing through auction, people will have done their due diligence and offer or put a bid on for what they want to pay for it based on their due diligence? Or do you think that sometimes people push it a little bit too far?
Auctions are really interesting, and some of my best friends buy from us in auction, so I can talk to you firsthand. In an auction, you bid because you want to win it.
Yeah.
And then you carry on bidding because you don't want to lose it.
Yeah.
And then you carry on bidding because somebody's got the brass neck to keep bidding against you and you need to win.
Yeah.
And it does bring that sort of a competitive element out of people. I've had friends of mine that have said, I'm not bidding more than 150, Jim.
And then
we've got to 170 and I'm saying, why are you still bidding? Yeah, just one more. I'll get it if I get one more. Yeah, but then you might not make any money out of it because it still needs refurbishing. But our job is to put it out there, let the best bidder win, and it's up to people what they bid themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So where we used to have live event auctions where we took over a football stadium, all of our auctions are live streamed now, which is what most people do. And surprisingly, when some of the auction houses have gone back to a physical ballroom, nobody's turned up because auctions seem to have got bigger. There's not often we have auctions less than 200 properties, and bear in mind we have auctions every single month.
Yeah.
So people just don't turn up because it's a lot easier to register online, bid online. You only want to bid on one property, so you don't really want to sit there all day waiting for your one property.
And how many people turn up to the online events versus the live events?
We can get 2,000 to 3,000 people register for one monthly auction.
Wow.
Yeah. Whereas before, when I worked specifically in Birmingham at Villa Park, they used to get 700-800 people within one of their ballrooms to auction. But a lot of them came for a day out. They came to meet people. They came to see what was selling. Sometimes they might buy something that they didn't have any plans of buying. Generally, the property that they wanted to buy, lots of other people wanted it as well, and it exceeded what they might have wanted to pay for it.
That was going to be my next question. Do you find that people come online to just watch, and they have no intention of buying? But then, do you have a similar percentage of people that are actually bidding live online as you used to in the live events?
No, we probably get more people bidding now online than we ever did before turn up to a room.
Wow.
But the interesting thing is, like we said earlier, where a lot of people are fearful, they're not sure, how does auction work? So one of the easiest things that I say to a lot of the clients that I talk to that maybe are considering auction, but they're not 100% whether they should or they shouldn't, and they don't really get it. So the easiest thing to say is, it's auction day on the last Thursday of the month. Go to our website. There's a big banner across the top that says, click here to watch live. We don't want your email. We don't want your phone number. We don't even want to know who you are. You can just click and watch. The only downside is if you click on at 9 in the morning, you might still be there at 5 o'clock in the afternoon because you want to see what the next one's going to sell for. But it gives people a lot clearer understanding of how an auction works if they watch one.
It's almost as if that somebody's thought of many years ago when the auction system was first conceived. They thought, how can we constantly give people a bit of a dopamine hit, even if they're not buying the property?
Yeah.
And that keeps them coming, and that keeps them fixed on what we're doing to see if they're going to buy the next one.
How many TV programs have got auctions in them?
So many.
Because they're engaging.
So many.
People want to see it. They want to see, well, what are they going to pay for it? What they're going to sell it for, whether it's jewellery or chattels or properties. Look at that big house that they bought. What are they going to do with that? Well, we'll have to wait and see, later on in the show to see what's happened.
Yeah.
And look, there's Jim. I've seen him on a few of them because I've done quite a few of those.
And it is just the auction process, isn't it? Because the antique kind of auction programs that you watch, they are literally bidding 14, 15, 16 quid.
Yeah.
On stuff, and we're going to see whether they can make 18 or 19 quid from it later on. So the amount of money that you're talking about is tiny, but it's that dopamine hit of a victory.
Absolutely.
So how are auctions doing at the moment?
We're doing really well. When we look at our figures, because obviously we're in 2026 now, so our 2025 figures were exceeded our 2024 figures, but you have to bear in mind that in the last 12 months, the property market has been a bit flat. For a number of political, financial, economic reasons, and you tend to find if things are a little bit low and a bit flat, then everybody kind of follows that same train.
Yeah.
So for whatever reason, and I speak to vendors that are selling with estate agents that want to sell, maybe don't want to sell at auction, and they just feel everything's a little bit slow. So we have done well. We've grown in the last year. So for ourselves, I can't talk for everybody, but we've had a successful year, and it keeps growing.
So attracting people to buy their properties into auctions is easier because of the state of the market that over the last 12 to 18 months.
Yeah.
So let's look at it from the buyer's point of view. Why would a buyer buy from auction?
There's a number of reasons, because you've got to remember, you're almost as old as me, so you might remember when people used to gazump, which is probably not a word that people use very often now. So you can agree a sale, and tomorrow, 3 weeks down the line, everybody always thinks it's the buyers that pull out of sales. Sellers pull out of sales as well.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I've had another offer. Oh, I'm going to keep the house. Oh, I'm going to do this. If you buy auction and it's exchange contracts, nobody's pulling out, buyer or seller, because, you're in breach of contract, and that's quite a serious thing. So you're securing that property at the price that you've bid. You don't need to bid anymore. You're not going to lose it to somebody else. And you've secured it from a buyer's perspective as much as you have as a seller's perspective.
And in terms of price, do you think that people are paying the market value for the property if they go through an auction? Because historically it's been like, you usually get about 10% of a discount.
Listen, you've known me for years, and I do lots of talks about valuations, and I get lots of investors and people that have known me for years come to me and say, Jim, what's the value of my property?
Whatever someone's going to pay for it.
What do you want it to be? There almost is not a concrete valuation. And if you've got something that's a little bit different or in a condition that isn't similar to everything else that's sold on the street, well, what's its value then? Let's say you've got a £100,000 terraced house. Yeah. The one next door sold for 100, the one 3 doors away sold for 100, but yours needs a new kitchen, bathroom and whatever. An owner-occupier might not buy that house because then they've got to find the money to do the work so they can live in it, and where they're going to live in the meantime. Now, if an investor's going to buy it and it's 20 grand to refurbish it, would he give you 80 grand and then spend 20? So it's then worth what he could have bought one that was already done up. So as an investor, you need some value. So each investor's got a different level of what amount of money they want to make out of a property. But again, we go back to what they're going to do with it. So if they're not buying it to resell it, the extra equity that they might generate might not be important. If they're going to buy it to rent it, they're looking at facts and figures of what that return looks like over anything else, and sometimes that's where people in an auction do get a bit carried away. If you're an investor and you've already got 5 properties on the street and you want another 2, well, if you overpay for one a little bit, it doesn't matter because it's quite handy because they're near the other ones that you've got. So there's not really an answer to it whether we get more or less, because what's its value when it needs 20 grand spending on it? I don't think there's an answer for that.
Do you see with people that keep going back to buy more and more property from auction, do you find that they're the more controlled ones when it comes to bidding? That they're if they say that they're going to bid 150, and you have relationships with a lot of these guys, right?
Yeah.
If they say that they're going to bid 150, they're capable of walking away at 150.
Absolutely.
Or do you find that even they will push it a little bit because they have that competitive edge?
It depends what your business model looks like. There are a lot of people where they've calculated the costs, they've had a look at the property, and they've estimated what the redevelopment costs are. So they've looked at that and said, right, if I can buy it at 150, it works. At 155, it doesn't. I'm not going to make any money. So those people that buy regularly and frequently will have a limit. I mean, a bit old-fashioned, but I used to say to some people, open the palm of your hand, write a figure on it, and don't go above it. They still went above it.
But then they get so sweaty that
maybe it rubbed off.
It leaves, right?
Yeah, the 5 looked like an 8, so they overprayed. But everybody's got their budgets, everybody's got their limits, and sometimes you might buy something for a bit more and then maybe do a little bit less to the property.
The auctions that you hold, the live events at the end of the month, the online auctions at the end of the month, do the properties that go into that auction, do you still advertise them on Rightmove?
Yeah, so we advertise on Rightmove, we advertise on our website, and they also go into a catalogue. So the catalogue comes out 13 days prior to an auction to give people enough time to see them, visit them, view them, do their due diligence. But you know how it works because you've been to one of my auctions as well.
Yeah, we saw the behind the scenes of a live auction.
You did
one day. It was fascinating. So when people see properties that are on Rightmove that are up for auction, because you can filter based on auction.
You can.
On Rightmoves.
Yeah.
On Rightmove. That is the stuff that's going into your auctions at the end of the month, or is that a different kind of structure of auction?
No, most of what we do is the live event. We also do single auctions, which is kind of like an online timed auction where it's an auction just for a specific property. Mm-hmm. And coming in the next month, we're also doing group auctions that are just online where people bid eBay style. So there's a variety of different platforms that we have. And obviously, people that do a similar role in the company to me, we decide on the vendor, the property, of which platform would suit best.
So how do you choose?
Is it
which platforms?
Is it a retail sale? Is it a wholesale sale?
So
your target audience.
Explain the difference between retail and wholesale.
Okay. So if you came to me with your lovely 5-bedroom detached house and you want to sell it in an auction, that doesn't suit our live event because the majority of what's in that live event auction properties that are investments, they're projects for refurbishment where you can add value, you might be splitting them into blocks of flats and development. So the audience that mainly looks at that isn't a homeowner.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if I put your lovely property in that, we're not going to get as much interest.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, if you look at an individual auction, eBay type style, for a nice house that somebody's going to buy to live in, you're selling it to a retail buyer. You're selling it to a homeowner. Mm-hmm. So where do homeowners look for properties? They look on Rightmove because there's not many people in the world that will live somewhere where they don't want to live. So when you start looking on Rightmove, you look for that postcode, that area, that village, that city, and you're selecting where you want to live. So having a bespoke individual auction for your house will only attract people that want to buy it to live in it.
So the wholesale stuff is more of the investor-led stuff, and it's got, I guess you focus on returns at that point, whereas the retail, put that on Rightmove and you know that people are going to find it themselves because they're going to be looking in that location.
Because like we said earlier, what different types of auction are there? People are looking for other options. Is there a different way of selling?
Yeah.
Do I have to sell with an estate agent? Do I have to go through the same process with the solicitor and the this, that, and whatever else might be involved in selling a property that might make my property fall through.
And that makes sense, actually, because the way that we've set up the search that we have on our website, which is specifically for investors, is that they can filter the properties based on the strategy, regardless of the location, because you find that people have got a portfolio of HMOs and they want to increase that. So they're willing to buy a HMO regardless of where it is. So that makes a lot of sense.
So where do you look? So most people will tell you they love Rightmove. They look at Rightmove every single day. Most sellers have probably got more knowledge of house sales within their vicinity than any estate agent, because they keep a record of every neighbour that sold and what it sold for, because that information is now available. If you go back 25, 30 years, my late wife was a phenomenal estate agent, and she remembers the days where your valuer went out and took photos and had to take a roll of film to the chemist to wait 4 days to get the pictures developed.
Yeah.
Then they cut them up, stick them on a bit of paper and stick them in a window. But there's no mobile phones, there was no internet, there was no Rightmove. You didn't know what your neighbour was for sale for, and you definitely didn't know what somebody had bought their house off them for. Whereas nowadays all that information is widely available to everybody. It's not a secret. Every now and then you might get an elderly person say, "How on earth do you know what I paid for my house? How rude." It's kind of like, but it's public knowledge. Well, where's that? I've never heard of that. But most people today will know that. So Rightmove is the best tool in the world if you know where you want to live in and you're an owner-occupier looking for a property that you're going to pay a retail price for. If you're an investor, it's not the best tool in the world by a country mile, because if you're an investor that sits in Birmingham, London, Manchester, Leicester, where I live, and you'll buy anything that there's a good return and you're not really fussed where it is, because there are national letting agents as well that will manage your property for you. Well, Rightmove is almost useless, because where do you look first? And how can you tell whether a property is suitable for what you want or not? There's just not enough hours in the day to scour, vast swathes of area for your next investment purchase. But because you're an investment buyer, you're a wholesale buyer, you can just download somebody's catalogue, and all they're selling in that live event catalogue is mainly stuff that you could buy. Just like a giant shopping list for an investor. So that's why auctions work really well for those people.
So looking back at that price, and you said that you often see that people can sell their price for higher than an estate agent would achieve for their property. How does that happen? Like how do people get there?
It's really unusual. The irony of what we do and what I do for a living, the lower I put a guide price, sometimes I get more money for it. Because let's take a property that's a 2-bedroom terrace house. Its perceived value is £100,000. If I put it in an auction at 75, how many people are interested? If I put that property in at 50, how many people are interested? If I then put it in at 25, we're going to get a queue round the block, up the street, into the next village, and we'll have 100 odd people wanting to buy that property and bid on it.
Yeah.
And again, the psychology of bidding then takes over.
It comes back to the competition.
You bid because you want to win, you bid because you don't want to lose, and you carry on bidding because somebody's bidding against you.
Yeah.
So it is unusual. So sometimes fortune, delivers to the brave. The braver you are with a guide price, sometimes the more you get for it. But I would always tell somebody, whatever your guide price is, your reserve can't exceed more than 10%. That's, a legal thing with trading standards. So you can't guide it at 25 and reserve it at 100. That doesn't happen. Yeah. So if you're guiding it at 25,000, your reserve can't be more than 27.5. But common sense says to you, you're not going to sell it for 27.5 because the one next door sold for 100 and there's 100 people that want to bid on it.
So what happens when, and I'm sure I've seen this, auction companies put down that the guide price is between two prices. So the guide price is between 40 and 60. Where does the reservation sit there?
So this has changed recently. So before you could have two prices. You still can have two prices, but your reserve needs to sit at the lower end of that price.
Right, okay.
Because what trading standards are trying to say to people is you can't be mis-selling.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you can't put something in at £20,000 when the reserve's 100 because you're mis-selling to those prospective buyers because they don't know that the reserve's 100 and that's not within the parameters of, fair business.
So the more competition there is for any individual property, the more likely it is that price is, and that competition element and that ego is going to get involved, and the higher that price is going to go.
I mean, I've had lots of estate agents that have come to me with properties. The vendor said, look, I just want to get rid of it. I just want to make sure it sells. Oh, let's put it in at 25. Yeah, we can do that. And whatever it sells for, it sells for. And then we sell it for 180. And the estate agent says, well, I was only going to put it on the market for 130. How on earth have you done that? well, we're not in control of what people bid. They just carry on bidding. We'll keep taking bids till they're exhausted.
So we keep talking about the psychology of the buyer, but then how do you go in there and get somebody who's got a property that's, let's say for argument's sake, worth 100 grand, list it for 25, because they could sell that for 10% above 25.
Yeah.
But they
Again,
have to have a lot of faith in you that you're going to be able to get the buyers
Again,
lined up.
it's very easy to oversell what I do. Yeah. But you know me, and I'm dreadfully honest with people, and I'll say to them, I might not sell your property. I might only sell it for the reserve. I might sell it for 10, 20, 30, 50,000 pound more than the reserve. You have to be comfortable with the process. I'm a grown-up, you're a grown-up. Let's have a grown-up conversation, and let's decide between us where we think is the best price point to put your property to get the most interest, but try and get you the best price. And there isn't a right or a wrong. But this is where I go back to what I said earlier, in not everybody's selling to get the best price. If they do, fantastic. But sometimes it's more about disposing of a property and an asset than it is making more money on it. I mean, sometimes when I talk to an investor, Jim, I bought this house 20 years ago as an investment. I paid 100,000 for it. The agents told me it's worth 200, and I'll politely remind them, well, you bought it as an investment vehicle. It served its purpose. You've had your money out of it. Even if you got your 100 grand back, it still served its purpose. Of course you want to make some growth out of it. But then you start getting into taxation and finance, and you're going to pay a big chunk of capital gains, etc., and you need to go and talk to your accountant. So actually it's not always about the best price. Now, if you bought something recently, of course you want your money back, and of course you want more.
Yeah.
But sometimes people will say, well, look, I'm quite comfortable losing 20 grand because I need to get rid of it.
And I've fallen into that trap of I'm looking at that through my eyes, which is what we talked about before, because the stuff that we've bought within the last 5-6 years or so.
Yeah.
So we're still leveraged pretty high.
Yeah.
But a lot of people that come to sell through you guys, they won't have that same degree of leverage. So long as they're paying off their first charge, which might be pretty low in terms of the actual today value of the property, then they're secure and they don't mind selling it at a lower price.
Yeah, and sometimes the reason that everybody wants to talk to Jim in the pub is because everybody's got an opinion. And I did a talk recently and I said the biggest problem with our industry and property is everybody's an expert. Everybody knows.
Yeah.
I'll put a property on and somebody will say to me, well, my mate in the pub said that I'm selling it too cheap. Well, sell it with your mate then. How many properties has your mate sold? Oh, no, he still lives with his mum. So everybody's got an opinion and everybody's an expert in property. So, it's only perspective and opinion.
So with making an offer pre-auction.
Right, before we do that, I'll just go back 1 second. So I'm going to say something. So you've got to remember years and years ago, and I deal with lots of old-time investors, and years ago, people bought properties cash and they never mortgaged them. I've met people that have got, vast portfolios where they haven't got any mortgage on them. But then organisations have sort of trained, educated and said, well, actually, you can leverage it and you can take X amount out and then you can go and buy another 3. And then as the property price goes up, you can do the same again. And then people have ended up having mortgages on them. And then that makes it possibly harder to sell if the market has slumped a bit and you're a bit too close to what you've got outstanding in the finance, then you've got to clear that finance in order to sell. But there are lots of seasoned old school investors that never had mortgages.
Yeah.
And they also, if they did have a mortgage, they had a repayment mortgage, not an interest-only one, because they felt that was the right thing to do. So when I get to the end of it, I own the whole property.
Yeah.
Whereas nowadays, most investors will have interest-only mortgages, buy-to-let mortgages.
Do you think that the number of offers that you receive pre-auction has increased, or is that always been roughly about the same amount?
It's always been there. What you've got to remember is, that terrace house that's worth 100, it's now in an auction at 25. Your phone rings off the hook saying, we'll offer 30.
Yeah. Pre-auction, you mean, before the auction goes?
Absolutely.
And then what's the incentive of there's just no way that that's going to get accepted.
Yeah, so our sales team are very seasoned in what they do, and there are some sellers that, well, look, I'll put it in an auction. I want to see what I get in auction.
Yeah.
I don't want to take an offer before. But then if somebody offers them 95, they might think about it.
Yeah.
So there's always a price point of where it might be, but a lot of sellers like the idea and the process of auction and sitting there on tenterhooks thinking, go on, one more bid. Oh, we've got this. We only thought we'd get this, and now we're going to get this for it. But there are certain vendors that think, well, hang on a minute, I've got it in at 200. Somebody's offered me 240, my reserve's 220. I might not get to 240 in an auction. So a bird in the hand kind of scenario. Well, I'll take what's on the table and I'll have it. So if you are going to make pre-auction offers, you can ring the auction house. If you're going to do it quite frequently, it's best to build a relationship with the salespeople at the auction house. So, it's easier to get an honest answer that says, well, look, the vendor's not going to take any offers for this, or he might consider it, make us a sensible offer.
So let's go through the whole process of somebody calls and tries to make an offer pre-auction, and that gets rejected. So they definitely want the property, so they go and they bid live at the event at the end of the month.
Yeah.
Should they be following any tactics? Are there any tips? Because on the day that I came into your office and watched one of the auctions happen, what surprised me was the momentum and the frequency and the timing of the bids seemed to ramp up the longer that auction went on for. So is that a known tactic, and is that what people should be doing, or is it better to get in there early and establish your bid?
There's different foods for thought for this. So I think the biggest thing that people do that probably isn't quite right, they'll see a property that's on at 200 and they'll ring up and they'll say, I'll make you a pre-auction offer of 170.
Yeah.
Well, where's the incentive for the seller? I've not even not sold it at auction, so I might get more. So why would I agree to sell it for less than what I've guided it at? The other thing to remember is when we auction it, and this is why I encourage people to watch an auction, because that property that's on at 100, the auctioneer might start in £5,000 increments because there's several people that are bidding. And as people kind of slow down a bit, then they'll go to 2.5s or maybe 2,000, and then they go 1,000. They might even have the increments go down to 500. Because what you tend to find, as you drop it, you might have not wanted to bid an extra 2, but you'll bid an extra 1, and then so does the other person. So then you bid again an extra 1. So actually, you've gone the 2 extra. But what you're trying to do as an auctioneer is get people bidding. Because once you start bidding, you carry on bidding.
It's harder to put your hands in your pockets again.
So some people, we had this from a gentleman that used to come to the Leicester auctions. Before anybody had bid, he'd stand up and he'd say 120,000, and it was guided at 100. And sometimes that does kibosh everybody else that wants to bid and think, oh, hang on a minute, he must really want it, so I'm not going to bid again. I'm not going to bid against him because he's going to keep bidding. But ironically, the people that do that tend to bid once and don't bid again. And it kind of quietens, shuns the room.
Yeah.
It's not something that we encourage because you want that momentum like you saw. But some people, that can be their tactic. The other thing to also remember is people can make proxy bids.
Yeah.
So you can actually offer the auctioneer an amount that you're happy to bid up to, and the auctioneer will bid on your behalf. Because not everybody trusts themselves, or not everybody's available on the day of that auction.
Have people told you that they don't trust themselves in the room to stop at the level, so they make proxy bids?
We even have sometimes people make a proxy bid, then they'll ring up and say, "Can I make another bid?" Because it's exciting, it's interesting. I've done this for a long time now, and I never get bored on auction day because it's kind of even I sit there thinking, where's it going to stop? What we're going to get for that one? And it just keeps going, and it's exciting.
So you've made an offer pre-auction, it wasn't accepted. You've gone into the room, it didn't get up to the reservation price, so it didn't sell. So now it goes out to everybody as a post-auction opportunity because it's been through the auction once.
Yeah. So when you look at any auctions website, and if you look at ours, on the auction day, we don't sell everything because that's almost impossible to do. But on the tab at the top, it's got all lots, and then the tab next to it says unsold.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's lots of investors that don't ever bid in an auction, but what they do is they hawk around and have a look at what hasn't sold, because their perception is, well, if it hasn't sold, the auctioneer might reduce it to put it back in again. So I'll make an offer of the guide price or below or whatever it might be. It doesn't mean that they all get accepted, because somebody might need the reserve that they've set.
Because if that person was looking for certainty when they listed their property in auction, and they haven't got that because it didn't sell in the first end of month auction, are they generally a little bit more open to offers?
Some are, some aren't. Again, it's all personal. So everybody's got what they need. So there's a psychology of a seller. So I've tried to sell it at that, it hasn't sold. So what will I take for it? And you have a different conversation with yourself of, where that acceptable level is. Before you've tried it, you might want 100,000. But if it doesn't sell at 100, well, I didn't really want 90, but yeah, let's consider that. Some people maybe financially can't accept anything less than what they've tried, and they might keep the property, and try it later on in the year or the following year.
But as you say, if you can start that bidding at the lowest price possible, you get more people that are interested, you create that momentum, you create that competition, and you're more likely to sell that property.
And if you watch an auction, so when I do telephone bids, nobody ever wants to be the first bidder.
Really?
Right, Chris, I'm your telephone bidder today. Right, are we jumping straight in with a bid, or are we hanging fire and wait and see what happens? Let's wait and see what happens.
Really? Because in my head, I want to go in, and I want to go in strong. You know what I mean? I want to scare people from getting involved.
Again, it's more about people's personality and character. A lot of people are kind of, well, let's see where it goes. And they might jump in, or it might go above where they were willing to bid.
Yeah.
So the auctioneer will go, right, I've got a guide price of 100, who'll bid me 100.
If I've done my due diligence.
And then he'll say, who'll give me 90? 85? 80, right, we're off.
Right, okay.
So, but the other advantage of that is because you start lower, then more people are inclined to bid. But then what you tend to find, if a guide price is 100, the reserve can't be more than 110. As soon as we've broke that, you'll hear words like, it's in the market, I'm on sale. So if the reserve's been broken, the next bid, if it's the last one, has won that property. So then you see all those people that were sat on their hands waiting to see what was going to happen, then kick into life and think, well, I've got to bid because it's gone over the reserve, so it's going to sell. I'm going to miss it. So all of a sudden it might not fetch what it should fetch, and I might be able to buy it later. It's kind of like, well, it's already over the reserve. I've got to start bidding, otherwise I'm not going to win.
That's good. Yeah. So give me an example, or tell me the biggest discrepancy that you've had between value, the like market value, versus what you've started the auction at.
Oh, that's an interesting one. So I'll use an example of one I had in Leicester. It was in a very, very popular location. Done up, the houses would have sold for 180 to 200. Houses in poor condition were selling for 120, 130. So there were circumstances behind this sale where they just needed to get rid of it. The lady who had power of attorney for the property, her dad had been an auctioneer, so she fully understood the process. So she was kind of like, I said to her, look, I had a similar property in Cardiff that I guided at 25 and we sold it for 157. She goes, well, that's great, but that's not going to happen here. I said, well, you might be surprised. But she says, no, I get where you're coming from. Let's guide it and reserve it at 25 and let's see what happens. But because it was such a popular location in Leicester, because I live in Leicester, so I know the area, we had 357 bidders.
Wow. But it's a 75%, what they're looking at is a 75% drop in potential price.
And it needed a roof. They had an outdoor chimney that had been sandwiched into the chimney breast, and that was the heating.
I think you showed me a picture of this.
I did show you pictures of this.
Yeah, I remember it. Yeah.
I used to use it on those examples. So 357 bidders. My viewing agent was kind of like, oh my God, who's put that on at that? You'd have sold it if you'd have put it on for 100. Yeah, but, we're trying to get the maximum price that we can. And that from a guide of 25 sold for 187.5. But it also sold somebody who hadn't even viewed the property. Because that's something that always shocks a lot of people. Well, Jim, we've only had 3 people view it. How are we going to sell it? Well, not everybody comes to view it. They've seen the photos. We do videos of most of the properties where we can. It needs a refurb. What am I going to go and look at? So it needs kitchen, bathroom, new walls. It needs carpets. It needs painting. It needs this, that. I've already calculated it because I'm a seasoned, investor. I know what I'm doing. So what am I looking for? So some investors don't go to look.
Blows my mind.
It does.
The same as the people on that popular auction TV show that I know you've been on, Homes Under the Hammer, who say, "Oh, I didn't read the legal pack."
I mean, that's a different kettle of fish because you want to make sure that if there are any circumstances, any additional things that you need to be aware of that might affect its value, any additional costs or liabilities that you might have if you're the winning bidder, you've got to look at that legal pack. If nothing else, look at the special conditions of the legal pack, and they will highlight whether you're paying the solicitor's costs, what fees you've got to pay. I mean, I've got one at the moment in London where there's Japanese knotweed with treatment. So those documents sit in that document. There's another farmhouse that I've got that has had a structural report, and there's some quite hefty cracks in that building.
Yeah.
And that document with its photos are in the legal pack. So if you didn't look at it, you'd think, oh, look at that nice farmhouse. Oh, I'll buy that. but it might have more cost implications.
So your season pros always read the legal pack. Don't necessarily view the property.
Absolutely, yeah. Because one thing that people don't realise, we're still governed by the same rules and regulations and laws as an estate agent. If I've been told and I'm aware that there is a structural report, we have to disclose it. Years ago, and this is why people years ago were always a bit sceptical of auctions, because, well, look, we can't sell it. It's got a load of cracks. Just chuck it in an auction. That isn't today's world. And so you have to disclose what you've been made aware of.
Looking back at that big discount that you got that person to start their auction bid on, obviously you were the circumstance was on your side because they were familiar with auctions and the process of auctions.
Yeah.
How do you do it with somebody that isn't familiar with auctions though? Because if you just
so with that one, the family actually had a sweepstake of what it was going to sell for.
Yeah.
And the highest sweepstake was the lady that was, in charge of selling it, and her highest bid of what they thought they were going to get was 90.
No, and it was at 187, did you say?
Sorry, for 187 and not. So everybody's...
Did they take you out to dinner afterwards?
No. They did say thank you, though, and they're very appreciative. And I did get them in the newspaper as a thank you because it was over Christmas. When you've got somebody that maybe isn't seasoned and doesn't understand it, there's always a point, and this is where you have a grown-up conversation, as I call it. Where is that minimum threshold that you'll consider for your property? Most people are quite honest. I think the vibes that you give off when you're talking to people are what you receive in return. So if they feel that you're a nice chap, you're trustworthy, you're trying to help them, they in return will maybe be more honest than they might be to other people. So they say, well, look, we really need to get rid of it, but we can't take less than 90 because of this, this and this. Well, we're not going to guide it at 25 and reserve it at 27.5 because if it sells at 60, that doesn't help you.
Yeah.
So we've got to be mindful and we've got to be sensible and we've got to be giving the right advice to people. But the right advice isn't about the property, it's about the right advice for the person. Yeah, because different people have got different perspectives of what they need and what their circumstances are.
Okay, so if somebody's now listened to the podcast and they're thinking about either selling or buying from auction for the first time, what advice would you give them?
I think you've just got to be sensible. I think you've got to look at it and think, well, what would I pay for it? I think there's lots of experts out there that will give you whatever price, and everybody's in a sales environment where I get so many people where they say to me, look, I put it on at 300, Jim. I knew it was too much, but they really convinced me that it was worth that. So I put it on at that, and I've not had any interest.
Yeah.
So most people, like we said earlier, most people know what they want, what they need, what they'd like for their property. There's not many people that don't. Most people have done their own research and homework. So when you look at the word valuation, is it a valuation for your property? Because if it is, why have you invited 4 people? It's a job interview to sell your property. So what that seller's doing is interviewing 4 candidates of who they would like to sell their property for them. So you've got to, I always say, sell your property with who you feel comfortable with. So the biggest advice, no matter how you sell it, is, do I like that person? Can I sell the biggest asset I own with that person? Why would you want to do that with somebody that you don't like?
Well, would you look for credibility in that person as well?
Absolutely.
Like if they've sold properties like yours in the last 6 months, 12 months?
Yeah, and I get people say to me, I see that you don't have lots of properties in Croydon in your auction. Have you sold anything in Croydon? My sort of thing is, well, yes, we have, but maybe a few months ago. But also, it's the type of properties that we sell. The location isn't that relevant. So have we sold apartments that haven't got an EWS1 form? Yes, we have. So there's a record there. But I mean, nowadays you can go to, there's so many review sites, and lots of people don't eat anywhere if they haven't read a review, don't go on holiday anywhere if they've not read a review. So why would you sell with an estate agent or an auction house if you've not read their reviews? And that's something that I think people do quite naturally now.
So if somebody is listening to this podcast and they're now interested in buying or selling at auction, what's the best way to get in touch with you and an SDL?
So the easiest thing is you can go on our website, you can fill out a form, you can contact us, you can ring us, you can email us. Anybody that wants to contact you, and you can come to me if they want to specifically deal with me.
Yep.
That's probably the easiest route to come by you. But my name's Jim Demetrio, SDL Property Auctions, and we are about to rebrand and become BTG Edison's Property Auctions. So we're now 4 auction houses in one. So we are going to become the biggest auction house in the UK. That has its obvious advantages. But yeah, get in touch any which way. I think communication's quite easy nowadays because everybody's got it in the palm of their hand.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Thank you for your perspective on auctions and your experience. And as always, a pleasure to talk to you. So thanks a lot, Jim. Thanks for coming in.